Hey everybody, it's Ron from Pick Dawgz, and this is Ron's Rundown. We're going to go over 10 college football games for Week 7, Saturday, October 14th, 2023. Now, if you like what you see, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to put your college football picks in the comments section below. And if you're looking for my best bets, you can find those at the Premium Picks tab at Pickdawgz.com. Alrighty, here we go. Here are the games for Week 7 in college football. First up, we see Indiana taking on Michigan. This one's going to be 12 o'clock Eastern. It's going to be on Fox. Now, we see Michigan as a big favorite in this game, and for good reason, but I'm more so looking at the total in this game. I like the under here, as I don't think Indiana does much of anything offensively in this ball game, and we've seen the Hoosiers score 21 points per game this season, but some of those numbers were boosted because of games against FCS teams like Indiana State, or a 29-point performance against Akron in overtime. But when Indiana's played some of the tougher teams on its schedule, like Maryland, Louisville, and Ohio State, they have not done anything offensively in those games. They scored 3 points against Ohio State, and that was a home game to open the season. They only put up 153 total yards, 82 passing yards, 71 rushing yards, only 2.2 yards per carry. It was an ugly offensive showing at home. Now you're on the road against a team I think is a bit better defensively than Ohio State and Michigan. And when you look at Michigan offensively, even though this team is taking care of business and has scored 30-plus points in each game, look at the teams that they played this year. East Carolina, UNLV, Bowling Green, Rutgers, Nebraska, and Minnesota. I think you could throw Indiana's defense in the mix with some of those teams, most of those teams probably. And Michigan has yet to get more than 500 yards in a game this season. So the offense hasn't been explosive. The defense has really carried this team to its victories. And we know Michigan didn't really do well against the spread at the beginning of the season, playing some of those weaker opponents. So to me, I think we see Michigan win this game comfortably and potentially cover the spread because you're laying 33 points. I could see a 35-0 kind of game, 37-3 kind of final score, but whatever we get, I think we get under this total. I think 45.5 points, just too much. So give me the under here in Indiana, Michigan. Next up, we see Syracuse and Florida State. This one's going to be 12 o'clock Eastern. It's going to be on ABC. Now, I'm getting some unfortunate flashbacks to last year's Syracuse team that we saw open the season with a 6-0 record with some nice blowout wins, some nice wins on their resume, but then lost the game at Clemson, a close one, 27-21, and then proceeded to lose the next 4 games with a lot of blowout final scores along the way. 41-24 against Notre Dame, 19-9 against Pittsburgh, 38-3 against these Florida State Seminoles, and then 45-35 in a shootout against Wake Forest. But Syracuse, had its worst stretch of the season. Now, injuries played a role in that, losing streak last year, but still, the offense had 4 straight games with less than 300 total yards. The defense also suffered during that losing streak, and I'm a little bit worried we're seeing that now at Syracuse as they lost that game against Clemson at the Carrier Dome a couple weeks ago, 31-14, and then last week a really ugly performance against North Carolina on the road, 40-7 the final score. Syracuse only had 221 total yards against a North Carolina team that we know is solid offensively, of course, with Drake May at quarterback, but hasn't really been known to have a great defense, and still, they held Syracuse to 7 points, less than 100 yards rushing, and, like I said, 221 total yards. And then the Syracuse defense, probably even more concerning, giving up over 600 total yards in that game, 200 yards rushing, 442 yards passing. It was one of the worst games Syracuse has had in a long time. So now I'm really worried because you go to Tallahassee here. Florida State already beat you by 35 last year. We're getting a decent price with Florida State because they haven't been the best against the spread recently. We saw them, struggle at Boston College, and they were like 26-point favorite. They only won that game by 2 points. They needed overtime against Clemson. They didn't cover the spread against Virginia Tech. So now I think Florida State, the price is right with the Seminoles. You could say, you take Syracuse off a blowout loss because they're bound to bounce back, but I think it'd be more of a catching a falling knife, and I don't want to do that with Syracuse. So give me the Florida State Seminoles laying the points in Tallahassee. Next up, we stay in that 12 o'clock Eastern window. It's going to be Arkansas and Alabama in the SEC. This one's going to be your ESPN game. We see Alabama as a big favorite in this game. I know a lot of people would be concerned laying this many points with an Alabama team and offense that hasn't been the best this year. I mean, it's probably one of the weaker offenses in Alabama, recent history. Last 5 games, less than 400 total yards from the Crimson Tide. But I do think Alabama's offense smells some blood in the water after last week's second-half performance against Texas A&M. This was a team that offensively in the first half, 10 points, 148 yards. Wasn't too bad, but in the second half, right around 200 total yards. They put up those 16 points. They found the comeback victory against, honestly, probably a top 5 defense in college football this year in Texas A&M. So now you're playing Arkansas, who this season giving up 25 points per game, but in the last 4 games, 27, 34, 34, and 38. The defense is really not in good form for Arkansas. They've lost 4 straight games. I've talked about how this is an Arkansas team similar to Syracuse, like we just talked about, that last year they took a tough loss to Texas A&M. They went on a losing streak. The year before they took a tough loss to Georgia, went on a losing streak. I don't want to back Arkansas until I see any signs of life from this team and until they get back in the win column. So I'm going to continue to fade the Razorbacks. Last week they were able to catch the cover against Ole Miss, but they only had 286 total yards of offense. This offense is nothing like we expected going into the season. I think Alabama's defense is a really strong day. The offense is good enough. Give me the Crimson Tide by 3 touchdowns. Next up, we see BYU and TCU. This one, 3:30 Eastern. It's going to be on ESPN, so you can follow that Alabama-Arkansas game with this one. Now, TCU, we know they had big expectations going into the season, even though they lost some big, key players offensively. They made a national championship run last year, so they're looking to build on it this season, but they're only 3-3 right now. They've lost their last 2 games, winnable games on paper in Big 12 play against West Virginia and Iowa State. But I still think TCU good enough here to bounce back at home and win this game and cover the number. BYU, I don't like backing one-dimensional offenses, especially when they're playing on the road. This BYU team has not had a run game at all this year. It's averaging 63 rushing yards per game and 2.3 yards per carry. Big difference from last year's team that had 5.2 yards per carry on the ground and just under 200 rushing yards per game. Same thing in 2021 where they had 5.1 yards per carry. So Keaton Slovis is an experienced quarterback. He's a decent option, but I just don't like one-dimensional offenses. I don't think Slovis can beat TCU's defense by himself, and the BYU defense hasn't been great either, especially against the run. TCU's offense, while it's been a disappointing season for the team overall, TCU still scoring 31 points per game, should be able to move the ball with ease in this matchup against a weak BYU defense. And TCU, while they've struggled against the run the last couple of games, like I just mentioned, BYU has just not been able to run the football. So I think this is actually a pretty good matchup for TCU defensively. Give me TCU laying the points at home. Next up, we see Iowa and Wisconsin, the Big Ten. This one's going to be 4 o'clock Eastern. It's going to be on Fox. Now, we know Iowa college football is known perennially strong defensive teams. Since 2014, this Iowa defense has not given up more than 20 points per game, and that includes this year's 16 points per game given up from the Hawkeyes. But the offense remains the big problem for this team, and they've played 6 games this season. Only one of those games, in those 6, did they earn more than 300 total yards, and that was against Western Michigan, which is honestly one of the worst FBS defenses in college football this year. So Iowa's offense now loses his quarterback in Cade McNamara for the rest of the season. Deacon Hill takes over, and he only was 6 of 21 passing in last week's win against Purdue. The defense was good enough to get Iowa that victory at home, but now on the road against a team that I think can go toe-to-toe with Iowa defensively in Wisconsin and has a much more potent offense under Tanner Mordecai. I just don't think Iowa keeps up in this game. If we see a low total, it should be a low-scoring game, but I think Wisconsin does most of the scoring and wins this game comfortably at home. I could see a 17-3, a 21-3 kind of final score. So give me Wisconsin laying the points at home. Next up, we go back to the ACC as Louisville takes on Pittsburgh. This one's 6:30 Eastern. It's going to be on the CW network. Now, to me, this is a classic letdown spot where we're getting value on the other side after a Louisville big-time emotional upset victory over Notre Dame. Louisville, of course, 6-0 to start the season, playing great football, but Pittsburgh's coming off a bye week. They're a very strong defensive program this season, giving up only 302 total yards this year, 3.1 yards per carry on the ground, so a really strong run defense. Louisville's defense also has stepped it up this season. This was a program that a few years ago, one of the weaker defenses in the ACC. They had really big tackling issues, but they're playing great. They've really improved defensively year after year. Last year, giving up only 19 points per game. This season, 18 points per game. They held Notre Dame to 20 points and 298 total yards. So I think the under is worth a look, but in a low-scoring game, getting the home team, getting more than a touchdown to me is very valuable. So I'm going to take Pittsburgh in a classic letdown spot, taking the points. Next up, we go to the SEC as Auburn takes on LSU, 7 o'clock Eastern on ESPN. So we got 3 ESPN games so far in the rundown. Now, LSU, we know the defense has been miserable as of late, and overall this season giving up 32 points per game, the secondary struggling the most. But I don't think Auburn is as good an offense as an Ole Miss or a Missouri, and LSU's back at home for this game. LSU's offense is elite. We know that. They're scoring 45 points per game, over 550, almost 550 yards per game this season, 5.7 yards per carry on the ground. There were some injury concerns with Jaden Daniels in last week's game, but looks like he'll be a full participant in practice this week and should be ready to go for this weekend. Auburn this season is only scoring 30 points per game, which is solid, but when you look at their strength of schedule, UMass, Samford, Cal, not necessarily the toughest teams. When they played some of the tougher defenses like Georgia and Texas A&M, they haven't been able to keep up offensively, and they've only put up more than 450 yards in 2 games this year, those 2 games against UMass and Samford. So I don't think Auburn keeps up offensively. The defense has been solid this year, but like I said, LSU's been able to score against anybody this season. They've had at least 450 yards against every opponent they played this year, and they played Florida State, they played Missouri, they played some tough matchups, they played some neutral site games, some true road games. This is a true home game for LSU. I think it's too much for Auburn. Give me LSU laying the points. Next up, we see Missouri and Kentucky. This one's 7:30 Eastern. It's going to be on the SEC Network. I got to tip my cap to Missouri because I just didn't think they were going to be able to keep up offensively in that game against LSU. I know LSU still covered the spread. They won by 10 points, but Missouri was only outgained by 6 yards. They put up 527 total yards in that game, and it was a ball game for most of the game. It was a 8-point lead at halftime for Missouri. So I think Missouri's offense is honestly the real deal, and facing a Kentucky team that's coming off its worst performance on both sides of the ball by far this season, only getting 183 total yards, 12 first downs, and 13 points, while also giving up 51 points and over 600 yards against a Georgia offense that was not really doing too much before that game. I think Kentucky's in trouble here. I think Missouri is the better team. I'm going to take the points here with the Missouri Tigers on the road. Next up, let's go to the West Coast as UCLA takes on Oregon State. This one's going to be a 8 o'clock Eastern start time. It's going to be on Fox. It is never easy playing in Reese, or Oregon State has a huge home field advantage in this game, and anytime they play at home. However, UCLA, this is a team I think is flying under the radar this season. You know, they lost a lot of production from last year's team, really key production. You know, quarterback Dorian Thompson-Robinson, of course, the running back is Zach Charbonnet. But this is still an offense that's been solid. The defense has been really improved. I mean, I'm really impressed with this UCLA defense, giving up only 12 points per game and 254 total yards per game. They had a great defensive showing against a ranked team, Washington State, last week, giving up only 11 first downs. They've given up less than 20 first downs in 4 of their 5 games this season. Hasn't always been the toughest, in terms of strength of schedule. But last week, like I said, a ranked opponent goes into UCLA into the Rose Bowl and only puts up 216 total yards. And UCLA won that game and covered. DJ Uiagalelei, DJU, I don't know if I trust him to make the necessary plays to beat UCLA consistently in this game. We know Oregon State's got a great run game, but UCLA's been fantastic against the run. 1.9 yards per carry given up for UCLA this year on the ground. So I don't know if Oregon State's going to be able to trust in that ground game. DJU's going to have to make those plays. And while he's been okay as a game manager so far this season, this is one of the tougher defenses he's faced this year. UCLA's offense has some question marks. Dante Moore made some questionable decisions last week, some questionable throws, I should say. But I still think the offense is good enough to keep this game close, if not earn the outright W. Should be a great game, but I'm going to take UCLA plus the points in this one. Next up, the final game for Saturday's card in college football. It's going to be Hawaii and San Diego State. This one, 11 o'clock Eastern. It's going to be on CBS Sports Network. Now, I know San Diego State had the bye week last week, which definitely helps teams when they have to make those trips to Hawaii and play in a tough place to travel to. But I still don't want to lay points with San Diego State right now with how bad their defense has been this season. I mean, this San Diego State program, and I would say the last decade or so, has been known for very strong special teams units and defenses. But this year, giving up 31 points per game and over 5 yards per carry on the ground. San Diego State's on a 4-game losing streak. And yes, you look at the strength of schedule. They played some tough teams. Air Force, Boise State, Oregon State, UCLA, the last 4 matchups, but they really haven't competed in most of those games. I mean, we saw the last game against Air Force, 49-10, the final score, only 227 total yards of offense in that game. And now you're playing Hawaii, but it's actually had a really improved defense this year. Hawaii's defense last year, one of the weaker ones in FBS football, 35 points per game, over 400 total yards per game given up, but it's made them big improvements this season. And Hawaii's played a tough schedule as well. They played Oregon, they played at Vanderbilt in week 0, they played at UNLV, some of the tougher teams in the Mountain West, and some nice Power 5 teams as well in Stanford, Oregon. So I think Hawaii keeps up in this game. I think their offense is solid. The defense is really improved. Give me Hawaii plus the points. Wouldn't be surprised to see them win the game outright. And that's week 7 in college football. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. And don't forget to put your college football picks in the comments section below. Again, if you're looking for my best bets, you can find those at Pick Dawgz Premium. As always, this is Romanelli. Good luck.